I'm just saying, the only other group I can think of whom pressure games to bend to their whim and become something the original audience didn't ask for is the woke mob crowd. Don't like me drawing that similarity? Well, how about you stop acting in such a way that makes it easy for me to draw the similarity? I've briefly commented before about this subject matter in the past, but now I want to give this topic its own video and really dig into my opinions on this matter. Arknights Endfield is an upcoming gacha game that is the next entry in the Arknights franchise developed by Hypergriff. In terms of gameplay, it's a real-time tactical RPG with more deliberate world exploration, base building, and a combat system akin to a single-player MMO with AI-controlled party members that can be swapped between with shared resources. A mix of Xenoblade Chronicles, Factorio, and a little bit of Death Stranding. Lately, the game has become an active war zone between two ideas for the game's direction of the full release, following several videos created by Toboru, a smaller Arknights content creator whom spoke out about his concerns regarding the shift in game direction following changes made in response to player feedback from the technical test to the more recent beta test. Now, while I agree with most of what he had to say in these two videos, it's clear Toboru himself has drawn unnecessary backlash from both videos through his hyperbolic portrayal of other beta testers whom he disagreed with, and his contradictory statement of claiming to be robbed of his own enjoyment of the game, while at the same time sabotaging his team's performance in an Arknights co-op event by killing Wizardel players with his HP-consuming AK unit. I have no idea how he didn't see the contradiction in that whole section. Honestly, getting banned for only 4 months was a slap on the wrist. Anyways, this video isn't actually discussing Toboru's video. Rather, I want to talk about the counter-criticisms from those whom reacted to his videos that represent the other side of the conversation. Before I start, I want to make it clear that I have no intention of talking about Enfield's implementation of their gacha system. I want to wait until the game is out before I pass judgment on its implementation. Though, while on that talking point, I want to briefly say that a transferable pity system is just one piece of the massive puzzle that is a gacha system, and there are countless other factors that come into play that a gacha doesn't automatically become unsalvageable just because one bad decision is made. Rather, there needs to be multiple points of failure for a gacha system to be considered bad. As long as the absence of carryover pity is clearly stated front and center when the game launches, then I don't care. At that point, it's natural selection if people fail to recognize this stuff. So as far as I'm aware from what I have seen from the opposing side, primarily comes down to 3 things. Arknights Endfield has a very high production value and therefore needs a high return in revenue to maintain its update cycles and live service. Pretty self-explanatory. Just briefly look at the visuals, animations, and whatnot is enough of an indicator that this game will need a lot of money to stay afloat. Game systems need further streamlining in order to appeal to a wider audience. This refers to stuff like resource management and dodge functionality in combat, and simplifying the game's travel system. Base building gets in the way of players experiencing the game, and needs to be removed. Anyone suggesting to just offer players optimal presets to effectively skip the base building might as well be asking for it to be removed, so I'm not even gonna humor this middle-of-the-road idea. If you don't want to play the base building, you probably just want it removed. To combine these into one all-encompassing statement, if Endfield doesn't become more accessible, the game will fail. And to that, I must ask, who died and made you the arbiter of if a game will succeed or fail? If you haven't already noticed, the voices speaking out against Arknights Enfield's nuanced approach to a modern gacha game come from almost exclusively people whom play either Hoyoverse games or Wuthering Waves, and to absolutely no one's surprise are only interested in other gacha games that follow the trend of open world slop regardless of quality or execution. Following this delusional line of thought, they have created a narrative that Endfield would fare a better chance at success by ripping massive design elements out of their game at the 11th hour and scrambling to make the game's combat more action-focused and world more openly explorable rather than sticking to their guns and making a game that would appeal to an untapped audience that has been continually left out to dry with the current gacha games on offer. Okay then, Well, let's go over the possible audiences Endfield could look to attract with the current game design and what the Hoyo shills and Kurobots have in mind. To start off with, we have Factorio for the game's base building systems, an incredibly successful game on Steam given its low scale and production quality, with overwhelmingly positive reviews, with consistent 20,000 player peaks, and even 118,000 all-time peak 9 months ago despite being released on Steam back in August 2020. I'd say that's quite the audience for a game with a $35 price tag, wouldn't you say? Moving on from there, we have Death Stranding for Enfield's more deliberate approach to world exploration. A game with an accolade for being the most successful new IP in Japan during the 8th console generation, and even winning several awards in the 2019 Game Awards, one of which being Best Game Direction. Last, but definitely not least, we have Xenoblade Chronicles, an incredibly successful first-party Nintendo IP, which Enfield's gameplay is heavily inspired off of. Similarly to how Genshin Impact was heavily inspired by the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild series, and by extension, Wuthering Waves, for basically being a better Genshin Impact to many. Xenoblade Chronicles is a massively successful franchise within the Nintendo sphere of video games, including 4 titles, 2 of which had standalone DLC expansions, the other 2 had remasters to bring them to the Nintendo Switch, and the most recent game, Xenoblade Chronicles 3, went on to be nominated for Game of the Year in the 2022 Game Awards alongside God of War Ragnarok and Elden Ring. Elden Ring. And yet, the Genshin and Wuwa crowd, most of whom probably haven't even played Xenoblade Chronicles, wants to tell Hypergriff that Endfield will fail despite this massive untapped audience waiting to be appealed to and the brand recognition of the Arknights IP. You want to know what will actually happen if Endfield gets radically changed to be closer to Genshin or Wuwa? I'll tell you what's going to happen. Enfield's shift towards a more action-oriented game will alienate the audience whom were excited to finally play something that appeals to them in favor of an audience who already has their own respective game to play. The pandered to audience will play the game for a little bit, realize it's not up to scratch despite their demands for the game to change to their whims, and they'll leave unsatisfied. Why would anyone want to play a Genshin or Wuwa clone with an Arknights paint job over it? And if your argument is that Hypergriff has the potential to differentiate itself enough between the former two in its gameplay, I want you to actually take a second to consider if the casual audience will even bother to notice the differences or even care. Cause last I checked, the video game industry has a massive graveyard of video games that died from audiences failing to recognize differences in gameplay.
Let's address the most obvious problem with Titanfall 2's release, dropping a mere week after Battlefield 1, a game that had generated a ton of press, was part of a long-established franchise, and went on to sell damn well, as one would expect. Electronic Arts has defended this decision, which was apparently locked down months ago, as if that should matter, and claimed that the two games appealed to different audiences, with BF1 aimed at strategic players, while T2 was going for fans of fluid, kinetic gameplay. The problem with that argument, however, is that EA's games have pushed to be homogenous for years now, to the point where an EA shooter might as well be its own genre. No matter how different the games might be, when EA puts a shooter out, there are elements people have come to expect, and I don't think the mass market audience really knows or cares about the differences between big strategic shooters and fluid kinetic shooters. They just want a game to shoot shit, and Battlefield came out first, was more recognizable, and clearly the one they chose. The line about these games appealing to different players is bullshit when you talk about the main percentage of customers out there, those ones I talked about that just want to shoot stuff. Make no mistake, these games were seeking and needed the exact same customers. If what EA had said about the different audiences was correct, well then Titanfall 2 would have and should have done at least as well as Titanfall, but it didn't, because what EA said was bollocks.
Titanfall 2 died because Electronic Arts figured there was no overlap between it and Battlefield and Call of Duty, and released it sandwiched between two industry titans. Battleborn was a first-person shooter MOBA hybrid that played nothing like Overwatch, yet that didn't stop Blizzard's brand new IP from burying Battleborn 6 feet under on account of everyone thinking both games played exactly the same. Ooh, here's a fun one. This has nothing to do with video games, but this really just hammers it home, especially with how many times people in this gacha space love to use burger analogies. The restaurant branch of A&W failed spectacularly to advertise a third-pound burger in the 80s because people thought a quarter-pound burger was bigger.
In the 1980s, A&W launched an advertising campaign to promote a new third-pound burger, and the price was the same. So how come nobody bought it? Turns out, Americans are just terrible at math. Like, really bad. Everybody thought that 1/3 was smaller than 1/4 because, 4 is bigger than 3. The whole thing went down in history as a huge marketing fail.
That was in the 1980s. The 1980s! We are now in 2025, a time where illiteracy is at an all-time high and half the country doesn't even know what an actual Nazi is, yet you want to convince me that Arknights Endfield won't struggle by directly competing with more than 6 other open-world action gacha games? I got a better idea. Why don't you stop projecting your own opinions on everyone else, recognize that a gacha game can be more than a neutered open world, and just leave Endfield alone? I'm going to make a hot take right here, right now. I want this oversaturation of open world gacha games to culminate in a massive market crash in 2026, and several open world gacha games go under in the process. Quite frankly, I'm sick of all these games trying to be Genshin Impact or Wuthering Waves instead of being their own thing and letting the space grow into something more diverse and varied. The fate of Endfield has the potential to set a dangerous precedent going forward if the post-Hoyoverse gacha crowd has their way, and it's important we push back against this narrative before it's too late. We are not doom posters. We are not toxic positive communities. We are people who want to play Arknights Endfield. You are the real doom posters. You have no proof that a game like this cannot survive. You want another Genshin Impact. You want another Wuthering Waves. What you don't want is an Arknights Endfield. And with that, I have said all I really wanted to about the direction of Arknights Endfield. As more and more gacha games release in the mainstream space, it will get harder and harder for new releases to be recognized if they continue to chase the open world action trend. There needs to be a pivot fast before the collective open world fatigue reaches its climax and players start dropping games left and right. But until then, this has been Arikado Zodan, and I'm clocking out.